We have an amazing panel here with tons of experience, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then I have some prepared questions, and then of course we want to hear from all of you. So we'll start with Erica.
Hello everyone, good morning. Whoa, sorry, I probably don't really need a mic. So I'm Erica Voss. I actually am the Chief Information Security Officer for Zillow, which is for those who don't know it, it's how to buy a house online. So it's all about the technology. I know, who doesn't know about Zillow? I didn't before I got there.
Oh my God. Well, this is just about too funny because I actually am a real estate agent. How about that? We should chat. Yeah, we should. But I have a background in computer science and also emergency management. I retired from FEMA, so.
And my name is Amelia Phillips. It's sort of bizarre because in a past life I was a real estate broker. And I am currently a faculty member here at Highline, and I'm the program lead for our BAS in cybersecurity forensics and the co-director of PRCCDC, the Pacific Rim Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, which Dr. Stanley talked about.
Wonderful. So let's start with, how has the technology field changed since you first worked in technology?
Do you want us to all answer that?
Sure. I think I'm dealing with this. Okay, so I actually started off in engineering. So back in the day, they had the MIC program, which was the Minority Introduction to Engineering. About 2 weeks ago was my 40th high school reunion, just to put it in perspective. And when I got to school, we had Multics. So it was a huge computer that did, fit in this room. And so that's how it's changed. I remember buying my first Macintosh back in 1988. It had 2 floppy disk drives, and the hard drive was 60 megabytes and was the size of a phone book.
Well, my folks owned a word store, which may not seem relevant, but when first computers came out, my dad and I ordered all of them and we tested them. Okay, so I was in junior high and we tested the Atom, which was terrible, the little thing that came out that was about the size of your phone now, that you could program on the TV, but it never had any memory, so as soon as you shut things off, everything you did was gone. That was helpful. And the Apples and the Commodore 64 and all of those things. And I ended up being the person that got drug out of classes in school to go help the school with their own computers. So that's where I started.
For me, so it's kind of an interesting story. I used to be a high-risk transport lieutenant for Department of Corrections, so I did not grow up in the technology field. I actually grew up as essentially more so or less a trained first responder. Maximum custody men is who I've surrounded myself with all day long. So for me, it's interesting to hear kind of us talk about communication, because communication is my #1 strength, I think. What's interesting is through the years, my chief information security officer at the state at the time came to me and said, "Hey, I would love for you to do disaster recovery for us." And I was like, "I do that all the time. Like, what do you mean?" And he was like, "No, I'm going to take you in this room and we're going to look at this, machine, and you're going to be able to build me a response plan for it." And I was thinking, piece of cake, I've got this. I go in this room, there's this massive mainframe, and I kind of looked at it and I was like, "You want me to do what with that?" So for me, it was interesting. So I started growing up in the mainframe space and then building response plans around it, and then kind of evolved to where my career is today. So what's interesting for me is technology from a high school perspective was all about learning about Microsoft when they first were becoming a publicly traded company. So just kind of fast forward to today, it's really, technology is everywhere, which is interesting.
All right, thank you. So can then each of you tell us what you think the key knowledge or skills and abilities that have made you successful in the field of technology, or just in your jobs in general?
This is kind of fun. I feel like it's past the mic game.
Start over there.
I know, I feel like it. So for me, I think what's been successful when I think about kind of that question, it's really around, one, the communication skills naturally for me. And I actually push myself to understand the environment. So when I say, yes, I sit in my role, and as executive, I sit with a bunch of brilliant engineers all day long, and because I didn't grow up in the engineering space, mine is more about it being fully transparent and understanding. So like I will sit there and sometimes I will Google when they're talking about, oh, I'm gonna secure like SSH, and I'm like, why don't they just say shh? Isn't that what that means? So I tend to find, I use my communication skills in saying, hey, you know what does that mean? Like break that down to me, help me understand why I want to solve that. Why should I care? Yes, security is very hot, it's a very demanding field, it's all around your data privacy. Equifax, I think, is going to change the way we as a nation, quite frankly, handle breach incident responses these days. But for me, it's understanding where am I working, what am I doing, how am I solving for it, and that's the question I constantly ask. And so when I think about the career and where do I want to grow, I am constantly challenging myself to be smarter, better, faster. Will I ever know everything? Are you kidding? We work in technology. We're never going to be ahead of the game. Like, it's really about understanding your environment and figuring out how to adapt and build your strengths that way.
I would say the key skill I have is problem solving. It's taking whatever problem it is, finding a root cause, and breaking it into pieces that are solvable. And it doesn't matter what that problem is, it doesn't matter whether it's an emergency management thing, and let's say you've done an exercise and you're looking for things went sideways. Well, why did they go sideways? Was it the plan? Was it a lack of training? What needed to happen? How do you make it better? And that problem solving and breaking it down really makes it so that you can communicate it to somebody else viable.
Okay, so, wow. Mine's a little bit different. So I'm the abstract person. When I was chair of the Pure and Applied Science Division, I would tell them I tolerate linear thinkers. Because I'm not one. I'm just not. I'm the person who creates things. I remember, I guess it's been 5 years now, when our VP walked up to me and said, Amelia, would you like to create your own bachelor's degree? Sure. Little did I know that would be the next 3 years of my life. But it's sort of, okay, what do you have to do to put together a bachelor's degree? What goes into it? How do you make it align with the NSA's requirements? How do you do this? How do you do that? So that was the 4th degree I created in my career. So that's what I do. I saw a problem. They mentioned I have a textbook. I was in e-commerce. I noticed that people were breaking into all the servers. And I'm like, okay, people need to be trained in how to do this. We need a textbook. I went to my publisher, said, you need to get a textbook for this. A year later, they said, you want to write the book? Sure. So it's more of seeing opportunities and solving the problem. Don't just see the problem and go, we're just not going to do anything. No, you solve the problem. You be the solution.
So I think all of our speakers have highlighted the ability or the natural longing to solve problems. So that seems like it's a common theme. So do you think that attribute, the ability to solve problems, and also Erica mentioned asking a lot of questions, is seen as an attribute by your counterparts or as a detriment, and maybe specifically your male counterpart?
If you can solve their problems, and they have them, and also if you can translate for them. I've worked with a lot of techie guys, and they are great at techie. But when it comes over and you want to explain it to somebody who is not techie, they need that translator. And being able to do that translation is incredibly valuable, and it goes both directions. It's also if you're working for a client and they want you to build a widget, you have to be able to get them to describe what the widget is well enough that you can translate it back to the techies so they understand what that widget's supposed to do. So I think it's been definitely an attribute.
Yeah, I think the way I do things, most of the people that I work with appreciate it. When I was an engineer, you had to be creative because this was back in the early days of the shuttle. And you were solving problems that nobody had solved before. And if you can think way outside the box and go, okay, why don't we approach it from this direction? And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. And then they can go and build it, sort of what she said. You solve their problems, they're gonna love you.
I think it's, for me, at least in my career span, so I probably don't look like I'm over 40, but I am over 40. So the running joke is prison treated me well. Which kind of, sparks interesting conversation with men. They're like, what? Which is kind of where I kind of use that advantage to my situation. So what's interesting is it does work if you're willing to spend the time. And I think that's what sometimes we often forget, that is how much time are you really willing to invest? Today I manage a team of 14 people, and the oldest person on my team is 28, and so they're very much a non-communicative group, and I'm like, okay, I have very smart, brilliant engineers, like, let's break down and like do a presentation of what security is to the company, and they're like, I don't want to do a presentation, don't make me talk, like, oh my god, isn't that your job? And I'm like, okay, like, let's just start with one slide, and I make them do a slide to me every week just to see what their communication skills are, to teach them how to evolve their career. And it's been interesting because I do it in what is called a 3P fashion. Tell me your plan, tell me your progress, and tell me what your problem is. So I have one engineer who's a phenomenal fisher, took second place at a Black Hat conference a couple of years ago. And he comes in, he's like, my plan is to buy a house one day. My problem is I don't want to be you. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, but my progress is I know I need to learn how to be you. And I was like, okay, so let's, like, how do we solve that? And he's like, yeah, you always ask that question. And I find it's asking the question that is getting my team to think differently. And so it's very much about how can I relate to them and them relate to me, where now they come with this slide, and it's, this 3P slide that has now turned into like 3 slides. One is all problems, one is all plans, one is all progress. But they're continuing to evolve. And granted, I've only been at Zillow like roughly 90 days, and I'm now finding my groove. But it's fun to watch my team now change, where they're coming to me going, you're not gonna believe this, I actually went to a meeting today and I asked the question, how do I solve it? And people just looked at me like, well, are you Erica? Like, that's a win. That was such a huge win to see this team starting to transform, because now they're starting to ask that question. How do they communicate differently? Because they can come to me and they're like, hey, look at these 57 apps that I created. And I'm like, awesome, just when I need to learn another app. Like, I'm struggling with the Snapchat as it is right now, so. But I mean, that's what it's coming down to. It's how you communicate. And so I'm finding it's relating to them, but them also being able to relate to me and saying, okay, how can we solve this together? Which I think is a strength, definitely.
Great segue to, what is your greatest strength as a leader? You just said what yours was.
I got a pass.
You can add.
Oh gosh, my greatest strength as a leader is something I've worked on, and that is inspiring people. I'm a train the trainer. I want to make people better. I want to sooner or later be able to segue out of this field and go and travel the world and whatever. But that means that other people have to be ready to step in. And so I want people to know that they can do this. I've basically told you my age, so imagine a black woman at MIT in 1977. Okay, in my class of Aeroastro, there were 54 majors, so that's aeronautics and astronautics, because I was in the space program. That's all I wanted to be, was an astronaut, just to be clear. This IT was, something else. But there were only 3 women out of the 54. At MIT, the ratio of men to women was 10 to 1. Okay, and so, you just did stuff, and you made it happen. Nothing's impossible. The impossible just takes a little longer.
And people will tell you it's impossible. And you'll go, well, did you notice what's happening over here? I think encouraging others and being willing to ask those hard questions and force people to think. Kind of takes them out of their comfort zone a little bit.
I think honestly, really for me, my strength is my passion. I love what I do. I would do what I would do for free. And I think that, quite frankly, I know people are always like, really? But it's true, and I think that it explains who you are as a leader. And I think if you're passionate about your space and you get excited about your space, people start to gravitate to you. They want to work with you. They want to, hey, could you mentor me? Hey, could you help me do this, or help me understand why, or how do I do it? So for me, that's one of the strengths I constantly talk about with my team is I want you to love what you do. I want you to come to work every day and be excited. Yes, we all admit we have our, crappy days. Everybody does. But then there's days where you have something amazing happen and you respond to it and you can handle it and you're just like, this is pretty cool. This is what I was meant to do. So for me, that's one thing that I definitely think is definitely by far my strength is you've got to be passionate in what you do. I mean, how many of you honestly in this room by show of hands love what you do today? It shows, right? That's why you come to the events like this. You come because you're like, how do I push myself forward? How do I learn more? How do I become smarter, faster, more efficient? And I think the more you share that passion across, the more excitement you'll see as you grow into your field and grow into your long-term career.
Thank you. And thank you for the impossible. I heard that, break it down. I am possible. So, how have you, or what approaches have you used to build partnerships and foster good relationships, maybe specifically with people that think differently than you do?
You just like handing out that.
Always want to know.
And I am not a middle child, just so you know. I have reached out to people, especially when I'm working in emergency management, just reaching out to people that you may see on the sidelines of stuff that you don't usually get pulled in. Because I think, especially in emergency management, there seems to be a team, so you need fire, you need EMS, you forget about dispatch. Community corrections is often sidelined. Public works is there, because they're always shutting down things and doing good stuff for you. But you might forget public health, they're kind of important. Oh, maybe some community groups would also be helpful to have. And just take a look at, when you're reaching out, who are you forgetting? Who do you need? And ask your other partners, who else should be here? And just reach out to them. People are amazingly willing to help. But you gotta ask. They're not gonna knock down your door and say, hey, we wanna help you. Not usually, but if you ask, they'll say, sure. Oh yeah, love to do that.
For me, it's definitely about it's a concept I like to do called building a bridge. So how do I build a bridge with my peers, my stakeholders, my partners, my team? And so that's kind of how I essentially do it, is I approach and go, there's something in this room that we're all gonna take away from this. Now, how do I build that bridge with you guys going forward? I would love for 100 people in this room to reach out with me through a LinkedIn connection and say, hey, I would like to pick your brain a little bit more. That's building a bridge. You may 20 years down the road come back and go, hey, I'm gonna go work for the city of Redmond, and I remember when I went to this event and met this lady. That's what I'm all about doing, is how do I build that bridge with you? How do I become more connected? How do we take this next steps forward? So.
Wow. Okay, so I mentioned that I like to travel. So in building relationships, you start off, for me, putting what do they need first. So like Monday, I just landed back from Namibia, so it was a 24-hour flight, 3 legs, so if I'm seeming a little spacey, that's why. But I've been going back there now for 16 years because we've started a relationship. It's building what they need, and then more people have joined. I've watched them grow. And then it's like, okay, so we're gonna do an international cyber competition. They're like, okay, yeah, we can host it, and if we host it, then we're gonna have the awards here, and we can invite this school, and we know people in that country that we can invite. And so then you get to draw on everybody's strengths, and everybody feels successful and a part of it. And that, I think, is the important thing, is that everybody feels that they can contribute and that they are a very vital link in what we're creating.
So talk to us a little bit about some of the strategies you've used to deal with the negative opinions of your male counterparts. problem either.
I mean, I can go in the past.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean, it didn't have to be right this minute.
Okay. Well, when I looked at that question, one of the things that came up was when I was living in northern Idaho and I was working in Spokane. And I was working for a place that was a computer consulting firm. And this was back when Windows had first come out. And I was assigned, there were 3 guys, so the owner was a man and there were 2 other guys who were also computer consultants. I was assigned to one who was supposed to take me around, and he was intimidated by me. I mean, quite honestly. He thought he was God's gift because he understood Harvard graphics. And that's a really old program. In case you'd ever see Harvard graphics. Really old program. I'm sitting here going, he was mad because I just sat down and figured it out and, like, okay. And he was angry that I could figure it out that quickly. And I'm looking at him going, I'm an engineer, I went to MIT, I write the programs, this is garbage. Not garbage, but, he was so angry that one day I was sitting there on the phone with a client and he came bursting into my office and I'm like, just hold on. Because I asked him to shut up while I was talking to a client, he went downstairs and demanded that I be fired. And I was just like, okay, I need to do something else. And it was just one of those situations where, all I was doing was my job. But I didn't change. I still kept doing what I wanted to do. I started becoming more sensitive to how people viewed me. And so I did notice when people were getting intimidated, because I didn't think I was being intimidating. I was just being me. But, it happens. So maybe you all have had a few situations like that as well.
I haven't had it from the colleague techie folks. I've had it from managerial. So I used to be a Nobel engineer, and actually was at an EOCI, which is a correctional institute in Eastern Oregon, working on their networking stuff because they had a program with the local college, and an admin guy that was there from the college wanted to impress upon me how good these other people were that were there working on some of the tech stuff, and they said, well, she's the one with the degree, and looked at him like he might be an idiot, and that's the last I heard of it, so that's my, so it was actually the techs that stood up for me to admin, and that's the last I heard of any of that stuff, and I haven't had that problem, so I guess I've been amazingly blessed.
I think sometimes you have to let your actions speak for you rather than being defensive or thinking, oh, I have to prove myself. Letting your competence in what you're doing show that you know just as much as your male counterparts without having to be defensive. Did you have a comment?
Well, I had a question. I think that we've all been in these situations where you're encountering a man who has a big ego, and I think that this is a real problem for girls right now, where you have to make yourself feel dumb so that you don't hurt their ego, and it sucks, but I think it's a very real thing. How do you do that? You don't want to make it seem like you're dumb because you want to protect their ego, but at the same time, if they're in a position of power, whatever, you have to do this thing. Don't do it.
Yeah, I think you have,
Dumb yourself down.
yeah, exactly. You have to show by your actions what you know.
Be confident, not arrogant.
And not feel like you have to dumb down because of their ego. I think that feeds into that stereotype that we don't know what we're doing. Somebody else?
This is one of the areas that we're finding, the soft skills being trained up with all our staff, all generations. And so we're going to start experimenting. So I can't tell you how successful it is yet, but we're looking at training people on the how-tos. So the how-tos are how to be an ally if you see a situation where there's constant interruptions or, you know, discrediting or any of those very common situations that you as an ally and you as the recipient are trained to respond. So we'll have little scenarios and we'll practice. Because, yeah, I find that, you know, we don't train our kids, for example, how to go through a breakup, right? I mean, or how to have a difficult conversation. And we're in the Pacific Northwest. Difficult conversations are totally off the table. And so training people on just those basic skills and how to remain calm and professional, that's what we're going to start looking into.
So then, how have other women in technology influenced your career? Good or bad?
I wouldn't say, okay, so number one, if Corrine is still here, Corrine's like, okay, I just got this grant, you know, do you want to work on it? And so she's given me a lot of opportunities. Years and years ago, the way that I ended up in Namibia is a lady that I worked for who had been my mentor. I'd worked for her off and on for about 8 or 9 years doing training for small businesses. And she called me up one day and said, Amelia, would you like to do a faculty exchange? And I'm like, no, you need to come to dinner. Okay, at the end of dinner, I had my invitation to Namibia. So this is now 16 years later, and I've been going back every year. And I never would have imagined that, you know, I mean, quite frankly, I had never heard of Namibia until I got invited there. I had to go look it up. So it just, you just never know. So I've had those two. Then of course Linda has given me a lot of opportunities. Just tons of people are out there that give you the opportunity to shine. And so I think that's part of what each one of us needs to do, is how can we allow others that are coming up behind us to shine.
One of the things, when I was listening to some of the questions that I wrote down as a takeaway to remember to tell you all, is that when you're talking about promoting yourself, I got this tip from a gal I work with, a great friend of mine, and she said, at the end of every week, every month, whatever, write down the things you've done. Because you're going to get a review, right? You go to a job, you get a review. Well, if you don't remember what you've done, don't expect that your manager is going to remember everything you've done either. And that's a great way to promote yourself on the things you've done, and you can say, hey, I deserve A+, superior, whatever the grading score is, here's why. And it's highly likely you will be the only one doing that. And faced with that evidence, they will give you those high scores.
I think for me, I remember when I was working for Department of Corrections, our emergency manager was a female, and I remember thinking to myself, I want her job. The guys go to her, she's cool, she's awesome, she talks a lot. Like, I just thought everything about her was amazing, which is where I was like, that's it, that's my job, that's my calling, I'm gonna be emergency management director. Fast forward all these years later, it's funny to be on the IT side because I still go back to her and I'm like, I remember when I wanted to be an emergency management director. And she was like, you would have never made it. And I remember sitting there going, what? Like, it was a little bit of like a humbling like moment where I was like, what do you mean I would have never made it? And she goes, because you're constantly learning and you're constantly pushing for something different. You want more. And she goes, emergency management, she goes, we are good at what we do. She goes, we love to respond. She goes, you want to respond, you want to train, you want to do all these things with it. She goes, that's what makes you different. She goes, it's not good, it's not bad. She goes, it was about challenging myself to be more and doing more. So for me, I would say, as a woman and who's considered an executive in the field, I might not be an expert all the time, but I surround myself with experts. Everybody in this room is an expert. There's something that we're going to take away from this. And how do you push yourself forward? So for me, I would say, as a woman in this field, I would want you guys to come to me and say, hey, how do I do this differently? Because Because I'm constantly looking to do something different. I'm constantly looking to do something better. I'm constantly challenging myself to compete almost on some level and be better. I might not be, like I say, I can sit in a room and my executive team that I sit with, it's 13 men and me. And I'm like, oh, this is gonna be fun. So I come in, sitting down, like today I had a board meeting, walked in, sat down, and everyone's like, oh my God, she's got a tie on. And I'm like, hey, how's it going? Like, let's break this down. Like, here's where we're having risks. Here's where we need to address the risks. Here's where we're vulnerable. And it was like, oh, subject matter expert. And it was like, that's what you wanted me to do, right? Was to come in and break down those risks. It's the same thing of being in this field. It's how do we break those down? How do we communicate better? How do we put ourselves out there? Constantly look for challenge, constantly look for opportunities. I think everybody in this room at some point has an opportunity or can bring an opportunity to the group. How do we share that? How do we change the way that we're doing our business today and become smarter and more efficient? That's really what it's going to eventually come down to when you think about technology. It's going to be about a smartphone. It's going to be about, like, quite frankly, me working for a company where you're going to buy a house online. I'm just like, through your phone? Like, really? Like, that's really where we're getting to? But that is where we're getting to. So technology is always going to be around us. So how do we change it differently? And I think that's where I would definitely say us in this room, we are the experts. How do we help each other continue to be experts?
Thank you. So let's open it up for questions, including if you all would share some of your strategies for dealing with your male counterparts who may not be as supportive as we'd like.
Okay, so Zillow. I'm the emergency manager for Redmond, and we just got over the big fire season in California, where it was a tight real estate market to begin with, and now we've got all this burnout and we've got an issue. So you have a growth opportunity. Long term, how can we connect with Zillow? And not like Airbnb, where I'm looking to rent. I'm looking to sell if I'm on Zillow. But is there a way that we can connect up in emergency management with people who might be willing to be a little bit flexible or philanthropic and open homes that are for sale for people for long, for recovery in a sort? Are you working on that?
So we just recently did some stuff with the state of California. Okay. I'll stand up. I can't sit down.
Oh, okay. So I won't stand. I'm going to stand anyways. So, okay, good. So the question basically was, how does Zillow partner with the emergency management community in the broader aspect of fires? I'll partner with you for sure. So I say that only because what's interesting is I kind of grew up in security, emergency management, crisis management. Like, I've done a variety of things throughout my career, and Zillow is still kind of being considered a startup company, doesn't have somebody like me. So, like, I'm talking to them about emergency preparedness and how do we do it? And they're like, do we do that? Should we do that? And I'm like, oh, like, are you kidding me? So, like, this would be a great opportunity where we could partner.
I can do that for you.
Yes, and I can introduce you to our new philanthropic director that just started. Yeah, see, I admit my weaknesses. That is not a word I can say.
I just want to say, Erica, I knew you first, okay?
Oh, I don't need the mic.
Don't need the mic? Okay.
Is Zillow open to allowing students in cybersecurity and forensics coming in and just kind of seeing setups?
Yes.
There was someone behind me who had asked about like the whole question of if you have to dial down to interact with your male colleagues. And I think that this is a little bit controversial. I've always found that I have to consciously dial down my power signal and it's not about acting dumb, and it's not about not being authentically myself, but I can come across with a lot of power in my presence, and so I dial it down, and that in itself is controversial, because people say, well, you shouldn't have to dial it down, and so the way I've looked at it is, do I want to get to where I want to go and play the game? And so basically I use that as a way to get to where I want to go. It's not fair and it's not right, but it's expedient for me, and so I realize there are going to be somebody who's going to disagree with me on that.
I would actually totally agree with you. I had a good friend who was a male say to me one time, you can't be the smartest person in the room, even if you are the smartest person in the room, because it's intimidating. So learning that balance is really interesting.
So I want to tag on to that, because I agree you should never dumb yourself down, but I think a big part of it is having self-awareness and understanding that everybody is going to perceive things differently, including yourself. and look at those biases. And when you're in that situation, definitely think about your communication style, because for some, you do have to back down. It doesn't mean that you are less powerful or you are being disrespectful to yourself. What it means is that you have a good self-awareness and you understand communication and people's perceptions, or the possibility of their perception. Whether right or wrong is not the point. It's just a matter of being a little more self-aware that we're all different and we all receive communications differently.
Excellent. Excellent point, thank you.
We got another one in the back.
Okay. It's nice for you guys to do it by sections.
I had a question for the lady on the end. You said your name earlier, I'm sorry. Your name was?
Amelia.
Yeah, Amelia? When you were talking earlier in regards to, I remember what you said, but I can't remember how you said it, about how you were aware of how people were, had issues with you. I was interested in knowing if you changed, when you became aware that someone had a problem or an issue with you, if you changed how you reacted or responded around that individual, or did your awareness just, okay, that person has an awareness of me, let me stick a pin in that, and later on if I have to deal with it, I know I might have to deal with this person differently because they have an issue with me. How did you navigate that? Because you realize someone's aware that they have an issue with you. I know for me personally, I tend to say, okay, that person has an issue with me, and I stick a pin in it. But if I have to deal with that person, how I may talk or act around them may be a little different than where I would respond to somebody that did not.
Well, in that particular instance, I decided not to take it personally, is that it would be, well, especially being in that part of northern Idaho, eastern Washington, just because as I've matured, I'm just sort of like, okay, this is how I need to treat this person to get the outcome that I want. And I don't really care. You know, if they don't like it that I'm smarter than they are, that's on them. However, we get back to what's my objective. And some people, yeah, I'm just going to put a pin there knowing if I approach this person that way, there's going to be an issue. And other times it's like, okay, we need to get a job done. So this is how I'm going to basically manipulate this person and be aware of their reactions and how we're going to move this forward. Because that's our objective, is to get the job done. And then when I go home, I'll scream. But I don't, again, it's being self-aware and just really handling the situation. And just, it's being conscious of other people's reactions. If they're in pure reaction mode, you need to be responding. Okay, that's not going to work. This is how we're going to make it happen.
I love that you use the word manipulation. We tend to think of that as negative. It's not. It means that you're working with or making the situation malleable to what it is that you want to accomplish.
Dr. Phillips, my colleague.
Okay, to that.
To all of you too. So we talked. I heard one of my colleagues there say something about playing the game, and I've also heard another colleague of mine talked about having the skills, how to navigate and play the game. And part of me being an exillennial, do you guys know what exillennial is? So I'm not millennial, I'm not Generation X, but I'm born in the midpoint, and it is a term, by the way. And I learned it recently, that's how I'm being classified. But as an exillennial, I've also learned that we aspire, so as the millennials, game changers, not just who play by the game. And so as people who have gone before us in some ways, fought the good fight, is there hope in changing the game, not just staying the status quo and just playing by the game? Give me some words of hope and aspiration, because you know what? I would love my child, my daughter, whom I do not have yet, I want to leave the world in a better place than I found it.
As I mentioned, I just got back from Namibia. One of the conversations that we had, so I was working at the Namibian University of Science and Technology, specifically in their research center for cybersecurity and forensics. And that's something that I founded. I started their first class back in 2005 when I lived there. And they have worked it into, now they're offering masters and PhDs in the topic. They're graduating 48% women in the field. And we were discussing this. I'm like, okay, what are you guys doing differently that we in America just haven't gotten a clue of? And part of it is cultural. I mean, because a lot of theirs is tribal, so far as the way things are done. But they are used to working together. And you have a lot of men that are part of the faculty. And the women are just as loud as the men. Or the dean is a woman. She's a former student of mine. A lot of the heads are the heads of the departments. So there is hope. We just simply, I think as women, need to be more conscious of standing up for ourselves and going ahead and, how to put it, breaking through the guys thinking that they know everything. Because what I found with students is these guys will say, oh, I already know how to do that, and then you get down to the test, they don't. And the women are like, oh, let me go study this real quick and make sure that I pass the certification exam before I ever speak up. Okay, so we need to speak up sooner and not be afraid of making a mistake. Okay, I think that's the biggest fear among a lot of women in IT, is that they're afraid of making that mistake. Go ahead and make the mistake, it's okay, because you'll survive. But I think there's hope because I've seen it on the other side of the world. When I went to Poland for the cybersecurity conference, the MC was a woman in IT. She was wearing the most beautiful dress in high heels. And I'm just sitting here going, you would never see that in America. You know? I mean, it was just, I was dumbfounded. So I think it's part, culturally, we need to embrace who we are as women and put it out there in IT. But then that's just my opinion.
I think it's very, very valid that we are changing. And we need to remember to encourage each other and don't start dissing each other, talking each other down, any of that type of stuff. Because I've seen a lot of that, and that breaks down the network of support. And if you want to have that network of support, you need to be one of those supporting links. So if you see yourself, if you hear yourself in your own head, thinking those things, go, wait a second, that's not okay. I wouldn't say that to my best friend. I wouldn't want somebody else to say that to my best friend. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to do the right thing and build people up all the way across, and that will change. That will change the entire industry. We'll make it happen.
I think one thing I would add onto that as well is we are the change. Everybody in this room, like it's up to us to change it. Like 10 years ago, was there women in technology events? Realistically, I don't remember them from 10 years ago. 5 years ago, started to see them a little bit more. Now there's all sorts of different types of technology events. So I say there is hope, and I believe there's hope because I believe, one, I'm going to make a change. I work with phenomenal millennials, and it cracks me up because we have a candy wall, and we have ping pong tables, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're like playing ping pong, and I'm like, do you not have a job? But I didn't grow up that way. And then it's like, yesterday was Halloween, and we dressed up, and we had a mimosa bar, and I'm like, oh my God, why am I working here? Like, I was so used to this. But yet, in the same instance, it's fun to come to events like this because I walk away more excited and more rejuvenated to come back and like share that technology and share that like excitement of being a woman in my field, and then go back to the executives and say, how do I push Zillow forward even more? How do we get more excited? Why are we not partnering with local colleges and getting interns in? How are we doing that with our children who are engineering students who want to grow up and become engineers? What are we doing to make it more exciting? And instead getting the, oh, you're kind of constructively tenacious, and I'm like, yeah, that's just a nice way of saying I'm a bitch. Right? Yeah. But I'm changing things. I'm pushing that boundary, and I want us to get better, and I want us. So I would say yes, there is hope to answer your question, because it starts with us in the room, and we're going to continue to push that. And next year when we have a Women in Technology event again, like I'm expecting there to be 300 people. It's gonna be too big for this room.
Yes, you're gonna sponsor it too.
I am.
Right.
I don't know where in downtown Seattle because parking sucks.
We have a lot of colleges around the area.
Even better. But yes, so I challenge you to be the change with me. All right.
Got it.
Come to Bellevue, we're right across that big pond.
Perfect. 425.
Oh, 425. Oh,
So one of the
sorry.
things I'd like to point out is, I work in the construction industry, I do promotions and marketing for the construction industry, and it's all men. I work specifically in the masonry industry, which is even more all men. And yes, it comes with its biases, but I think one of the things that we have to do is, as much as we're race blind, we have to be gender blind. Because so much of it is about the people and the personality. And the men in my industry are wonderful. I mean, I don't have a bad thing to say about them. Even from a journalistic standpoint, yeah, they could be better communicators, but so could I on some occasions. And so I think if we are able to take out, you know, the gender quality as much as the race quality, and we just see each other as people, we're going to be progressing even faster.
Somebody else in the back?
There you go.
There we go. Somebody else back here had a comment? I thought I saw a hand. No? Oh.
Yes.
So to kind of build on what was just said, I think we ourselves need to think differently about when we come to these events, that when we start off, we don't start off with a victim mindset that we are being held down. We need to stop looking at the men and how they treat us, because I found more problems not with the men, because they seem to hold us up, than with ourselves, with women and women managers holding down their subordinates and things of that problem. And so we really need to look more at the challenges we're facing, not who's putting those challenges in front of us or what gender they are, but what are those challenges and how do we overcome them? And I think by putting us in a victim mindset, we're not going to overcome that. We just need to say, this is how it is and how we can progress. So that's just
Comment? Question?
I have a comment on that.
Well, I just wanted to comment about being a game changer. I think being self-aware is one thing, but understanding the game and changing, the change will be very slow. For as history goes, we don't feel that 1% change in the ocean, but we know that how big that impact is. And so for me, I've had to start really understanding, I remember what impact I did have, even though I always want more. And so if I want, one word to say to everybody is really just have whatever you need to feed, to keep you persevering wherever you want to go, because the world isn't fair, and sometimes you have to understand that, what I'm doing now is understanding which game are you playing. And if you are going to play by the rules, and if you want to change those rules, you have to understand how it's worked for the last 50 years.
Right.
So.
I did want to comment on your victim statement, and that is a very valid thing, is you gotta not think of yourself as a victim. If you remember, it used to be when you heard disasters everywhere, there would be so many victims, and then they changed it to survivors. Survivors is a lot more empowering and a lot stronger. It helps people in recovery in huge disasters to think of themselves instead of as victims, as survivors, and overcoming those things. That mindset, it really makes a difference. If you look at a community and you tell them all, hey, you're all victims, and they start believing that, they start being that. So you want to make sure that what you're telling yourself is that you're a survivor and things are better and are going to get better.
Yeah, and I think overall, what do you want to create? So instead of being a game changer, create a new game.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Create a whole new game. Because the world is changing. When they say you're going to be buying your home on your cell phone, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's defining a whole new thing. I mean, you've got teenage millionaires out there right now. So they've done a whole new game. You had the young man, did you see, where he turned his father's, I don't know what type of store, into a haunted house while he's majoring in business, and he's putting himself through school that way by doing a haunted house. So that's a game changer. Not a game changer, but that's a new game. So create a new game. Don't play by the rules. Create your own.
Any more questions or comments? Yeah.
I think everybody can hear me, but I will grab the mic. One of the things that I wanted to share with the three of you that I consistently heard, and the smiles and the laughs, a sense of humor, both about yourself and being able to see the humor and the joy in that in the world and other people. So you all periodically, you know, were able to share those humorous situations, and it helped you. It seems like it helps balance who you are, that you can enjoy things that sometimes maybe don't seem enjoyable at the start or whatever. So I think a sense of humor is important for all of us. And the other thing that you all three have kept talking about, and all of you have, we, bear with me because I, by training, am a behavioral scientist. So we move towards what we think about. So that goal, that vision, we're going to be talking about that more this afternoon, is critically important. If you're in sports, I don't care if you're a pro athlete or whatever, you know about visioning, you know about the importance of moving towards what you think about. Because you have what is called in your little brain a reticular activating system. It's like a radar. And so if you start visioning something or thinking about something, a goal for yourself or whatever, suddenly your brain goes, oh, I didn't know you were interested in that. Well, there's been a lot of stuff around here that's been going on that you haven't paid attention to. Now, look, over there, you should have been talking to that. Well, and over here, look at what you could have done there. And you had this opportunity here that you missed. And so suddenly your whole environment has shifted, and you're picking up cues from your environment that will help you reach your goal and will help you transform the places and the people around you and all those resources and all those people. So, you know, and think about, I haven't bought a new car in a lot of years, but suddenly you're kind of going, I need a new car. You start looking at all the cars on the road and you go, God, look, a lot of people are driving this brand or they're driving that brand. The day before you couldn't have cared less about cars, but you suddenly gave yourself a new goal, a new vision, and now suddenly you have, you know, it's like, well, 30% of the vehicles on the road, you know, that today were, you know, Isuzus or were Jeeps or whatever. I mean, but you weren't thinking about that. So it is critically important. You move towards what you think about. Do not think negative stuff, guys, because it works the same for that. And so that's when we get caught in the victim versus the survivor. But I, you know, just thank you, all three of you, and thank you guys for the thoughts, the questions, and the sharing. It was pretty powerful. I am a little emotional even, so, but here we go.
All right, so any last thoughts? Yeah, okay.
All right, I have to comment on that victim type comment. What we're doing at King County is we're working on racial justice issues, and race, gender, all those things are tied into our operating system, basically. And what we're really talking about is structural changes. It's not just to individuals. So everybody here has a different experience, so you have to be able to, especially as designers, understand these audiences that have different experiences than you do. So it really does take that introspection and ability to ask yourself, okay, I've never felt that feeling, but what would it take to change that? And our systems are really what we're looking at now. So, thank you.
All right, one last time. I think lunch is almost ready. First, let's have a big thank you and round of applause. Okay, so Kelly, how much time for lunch, and how would you like people to behave when getting lunch?
You guys can have lunch, you guys can relax and talk.